Click. 3 months had passed since Morgan's death, and Nathan had still not recovered. He remained shut away in his room, refusing to see anyone whom he had been in contact with on the day of the shooting. He rarely ate when his mother brought him meals, and he scarcely drank from the bottle of water he kept in his room at all times. Everyone who attempted to talk with him could see how this was affecting him, physically and psychologically, and it was the latter that they worried about most. Despite being much thinner than he used to be, Nathan no longer spoke to anyone. Before he had the breakdown, he was always one for a deep conversation, whether it be about politics or the latest blockbuster. Also, it seemed like the Nathan that was always one to keep things in order was gone, as well. With each passing day his bedroom became less of that of an honor student and more like that of a pig. Whenever someone would go in to see him, Nathan would always be either laying in the fetal position in the middle of the messy floor or sitting in his desk chair with his back to the person. What was also off compared to the old Nathan was that no noise at all came from his room. He would previously had listened to loud music in his room, or had the TV on, but not anymore. Nothing about Nathan was the same. Mrs. Price sought all possibilities she could conjure up to make Nathan responsive, but every hope was dashed as it was tested. She tried using his older sister Natalie to coax him out of his silent isolation, but Nathan would not say a word to her. Natalie would drive back to college, complaining that the trip home was a useless endeavor, and with every failed attempt, especially the previous, Mrs. Price would begin to cry as she slowly drowned herself in whatever alcohol was in the house. It was an utter shock when Nathan placed a small note in front of his mother as she sat at the small kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels in her hand. What is this, Nathan?" she asked in a hushed tone. She picked it up, looking at it with wide, scared eyes. Mrs. Price looked up, but Nathan had already retreated back to his room. She opened the note quickly and read the 2 scribbled words, "Call Marcus." She didn't hesitate to grab the phone and dial Marcus's number. She had memorized it from all the times she needed to check up on Nathan. Ring ring ring. "Hey, Mrs. P," Marcus began in a confused tone. "What's up?" She couldn't speak for a moment, still overwhelmed by Nathan's brief appearance. She sighed slightly and replied, "It's Nathan. He wants to see you." She could hear him jump up as she said this. "He came out of his room and gave me a note," she continued with a shaky voice. "I don't know if he's finally coming out of it or what, but you need to get here as soon as you can." The simple fact that he came out of his room is a breakthrough. "Yeah," Marcus answered quickly after only a moment of silence. "Yeah, it is. I'll be there in 2 minutes." The two hung up as Mrs. Price hurried to Nathan's door. She knocked a couple times and said through the door, "Nathan, Marcus is on his way. He'll be here very soon." Silence. Mrs. Price hadn't really expected him to respond. Marcus arrived a minute later, not bothering to knock on the front door. He rushed to where Mrs. Price still stood. "Is he in there?" he asked. She nodded. The door opened slightly and Nathan looked through the sliver. Upon seeing Marcus, he opened the door enough for his friend to slide inside. He, Marcus, took the hint and entered the room. It was very different compared to the previous time he had visited, once warm with the sun pouring in through the window. The room was now cold and dark, the blinds drawn. What he remembered as a clean and tidy room was replaced by a disheveled mess. And in the middle of it all stood Nathan, now a thin frame wrapped in a set of black clothes that had barely hung loose on him 3 months prior. "So," Marcus said quietly as he watched Nathan, "it's good to see you, buddy." "You too," Nathan replied in a low, hoarse voice. He continued to stare unblinkingly at Marcus as they both stood still. "I've missed you a lot, Nate. Things haven't been the same with you gone. I have something to ask you, Marcus, and I need to know the honest-to-God truth," Nathan said as if his friend hadn't said anything. "Can you do this for me?" Marcus stared into Nathan's cold, dead eyes as he replied, "Of course, nah." Nathan cut him off as he looked away for a second, glaring at the door. "But first, tell her to go away. I don't like it when she hovers." Marcus looked behind him as he heard a sharp, hurt gasp come from the other side of the door. Mrs. Price's footsteps faded away from the door and, seemingly, back to the kitchen where her half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels awaited her. "I guess I didn't need to," he said as he turned back toward Nathan again. He quickly looked over his friend and noticed that he was surprisingly clean. He noticed how there was no dirt under his fingernails. He saw that his hair had been combed recently. There was no foul stench coming from Nathan. "Hey, How have you been keeping clean if you never leave your room? He asked. I sneak out when Mom is asleep. Now promise me, Marcus, he pressed. Yeah, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Nate, what is it? Nathan finally began to move. He backed away slowly and sat in his desk chair. However, his eyes remained on Marcus. I have a question pertaining to an incident you revealed to me shortly after my sweet Morgan's tragic passing. Marcus knew immediately what Nathan was talking about. He recalled the first moment he had ever lied to his best friend. 3 months ago, Nathan continued, you told me a story of how my Morgan attempted to seduce you. You told me that as I left the room for a moment to bring us all some drinks, she climbed on top of you and straddled you. If I remember correctly, you told me that she whispered in your ear that she had been wanting to break up with me for quite some time so she could be with you instead. According to your story, you remained loyal to me and quickly denied her and proceeded to get her off of you. Now, unless I'm wrong, she tried to kiss you, didn't she? Quivering slightly, whether from fear or the low temperature of the room, Marcus answered, yeah, she did. She kissed me a couple of times before I was able to push her off. Nathan nodded slowly. Yes, and I returned shortly thereafter, handing to each of you your drinks. As I recall, we spent the rest of the evening watching a movie, with you avoiding her gaze. Yeah, Marcus agreed quickly. But you see, my friend, therein lies a problem. Marcus tensed up slightly. What do you mean? Nathan stood up again, slowly walking back toward Marcus. The problem is that you were not avoiding her gaze, but vice versa. During our evening together, Morgan was not sitting in a position where she could steal glances at you. She was wrapped in my arms, her head resting upon my chest. We sat on the bed while you sat in my desk chair. I would have known if she was looking at you, yet I would not have known if you were looking at her. No, Nathan, Marcus defended. You've got it wrong. She was looking over at me all night. Remember, Morgan said she hadn't paid attention to half of the movie? That's because she kept glancing over at me. No! Nathan snapped, his hoarse voice resonating against the walls. She hadn't paid attention to half of the movie because I kept whispering in her ear how much I loved her. And I made sure I was quiet enough because I knew how awkward it felt when us three were together. Marcus was lost for words. He had been caught in his lie. Slightly. Morgan told me what really happened, Marcus, Nathan added in a softer, yet spiteful tone. She told me that you were the one who pounced, that you were the one who begged. Marcus shook his head slightly, no longer looking into his friend's eyes. No, he whispered. No, she lied. He looked up into Nathan's face. It was just a ruse she thought up so you would no longer be my friend. Once you did that, she said it would have been easier to cheat on you, and then she was going to dump you. I swear, Nate, it's the truth. For the first time, Nathan grinned. He shook his head slightly as he took a step back from Marcus. You are lying, Marcus. I can see it in your eyes. He placed his hand behind his back and his grin faded. He looked darkly upon the young man who stood before him. Tell me the truth, Marcus. Marcus glanced at Nathan's hand. What are you doing, Nate? Do you have something behind your back? Tell me the truth, Marcus, Nathan repeated. Nate, tell me what you have behind your back, Marcus insisted. Tell me the truth, Nathan yelled. Marcus stepped back a little, his eyes full of fear. I am telling the truth, he said, barely above a whisper. Nathan looked down, shaking his head. He sighed as he pulled his arm around from behind him. He pointed his father's Colt 1911 in Marcus's face. Tell me the truth, Marcus, he said warningly and desperately. Now, tears began to fill Marcus's eyes as he raised his hand slightly. Please, Nate, I swear to God I'm telling the truth, he pleaded. Nathan didn't hesitate to cock the gun. Tell me the goddamn truth, or I swear to God I will kill you. Marcus let the tears fall as he stared horrified at his friend. He was silent for a long time before admitting, yeah, you're right, Nate, I lied to you.